Today I'm going to be telling you about the 10 most underrated books I read in 2023. The way I define underrated books is I literally just go to my Goodreads, I pull up the number of ratings for all the books that I have read, and I look at what has the fewest ratings and what did I actually enjoy out of those books that have the fewest ratings to unearth my hidden gems, these books that I found that many people haven't read that I really enjoyed this year and that I want to tell you about so that you can enjoy them as well. First up is Revelations, Horror Writers for Climate Action, which is an anthology of short stories that is edited by Sean O'Connor and features a very long list of authors, many of whom you probably recognize. According to Goodreads, this book only has 44 ratings, which means so many more of you need to be picking this up. There's so many authors in this that so many people love. We have John Langan, Stephen King, Joe Hill, Philip Fracassi, Tanana Reeve-Dew, Clive Barker, Paul Tremblay, Sarah Pinborough, Josh Mallerman. So many authors that I see all of you reading, and yet you're not picking up this anthology. Strange. Supporting this book also goes to a good cause because the proceeds from this book, I don't know if it's all the proceeds or part of the proceeds, but at least some of the proceeds go towards an organization that is called Climate Outreach. And that organization works with people and organizations who want to communicate climate action to ensure their messages are tailored to their audiences, resonating with their values and identity, and presented by people they trust in the most impactful way possible. Highlights of Climate Outreach's work includes driving climate conversations across society, finding ways to talk about climate change across the political spectrum, changing the way millions of people see climate change, accelerating understanding of how to mainstream low carbon lifestyles, working with local partners in countries around the world, and working to ensure a just transition is at the heart of our path to net zero. So if you like horror short stories, I definitely recommend picking this up, especially if any of these authors are calling out to you because it goes towards a good cause. For me personally, I ended up rating this book a 4-star. I gave it a 3.5, but I rounded up to 4 for Goodreads. As with most anthologies, there are some stories that really stuck out to me, some that I just liked, and some that didn't capture my attention, and so I skipped them, to be honest. But there are a lot of authors featured in this. There's a lot of stories, so you're pretty much guaranteed to find something that you like. As for me, my favorite stories in this collection came from the following authors: Tanana Reeve-Dew, who I had read from before, Philip Fracassi, who I had never read from before this collection, Tim Levin, who was also new to me in this collection, and Josh Mallerman, who I have read from before. And then there were several authors whose stories I liked in this, including Stephen King, John Langan, Sarah Pinborough, Paul Tremblay, and then Priya Sharma, who was a new to me author. Next up is Sucker by Daniel Hornsby. This book only has 309 ratings according to Goodreads, and I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it a 4-star. I do think it is a book that has a more particular audience, so it does make sense that it is lesser read, but I think there are people who would really enjoy this book. I was one of them, and I think there are more of you out there who could enjoy this as well. This book is basically a satire of corporate America, and most specifically biotech and the sort of Silicon Valley type of billionaires and the types of people that breeds. It's also a book that is kind of a vampire story, question mark, but not very heavily. More the metaphor of vampires and the bloodsuckers who are the top 1% in this country. In this story, you're following a guy named Chuck Gross, who is the son of these really infamous conservative people, and he is trying to make a new path in his life. So he takes a hard 180 and he immerses himself in the punk scene, and he tries to start this record label, and he's living kind of like a double life, trying to move his identity in that direction and separate himself from his roots. But his record label isn't doing super well, and one day one of his old friends, Olivia, reaches out to him, and she is now founding this new biotech company, and she needs someone to come step in and help her out with a role. So he decides that he's willing to do that, and he gets immersed in this world and uncovers the dark underbelly of the biotech world. The main character in this book is quite unlikable, and he gets increasingly unlikable the longer that you stick through the story, but there's something about it that's so captivating. The character's voice is just so unique and sharp, and you can't help but to love to hate him and watch him on this journey. It's also a story about friendship. It's a psychological type of story. There are some funny moments in it. It just is a good time for the right audience. And I really feel like it reminds me so much of The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay, which is also a book that is very particular to a particular audience. So if you like that book and you're looking for something that gives you more of that psychological exploration of a friendship, is there a monster, are humans the monster kind of story, story, this is definitely one I would recommend picking up. Next up is Linghan by I Zhang. This book has 943 ratings according to Goodreads, and it needs more people to read it. It is so interesting. This is a little gothic horror novella. It's very short. You can read this all in one sitting or two if you really want to stretch it out. And the synopsis of this one is incredibly vague, and I think that is best because going into this book not really fully understanding what you're getting yourself into is the way that I did it, and I really liked that journey of just uncovering what was happening in the story. All you really need to know is it is a gothic story, and it's about the exploration of grief and how different people grieve differently. There's also a sort of speculative element to the story as well. Overall, I thought it was just really interesting, really well written, and I really want to read more from this author. Next up is Burn the Negative by Josh Winning, which has 1,712 ratings according to Goodreads. This is a book that I was lucky enough to read as an e-arc on NetGalley, so I do not actually own a physical copy of this one, but I really should because I enjoyed this one so much. It was so close to a 5-star for me. It was a 4, but it was close to a 5. It was like a 4.5. In this story, you're following a woman named Laura, who is a former child actress who starred in this really infamous 90s film that is now known as this cursed horror film. After the movie was made, a lot of people on the crew and the cast started dying under mysterious circumstances that happened to match the way their characters died in the actual movie. Laura really tried to distance herself from that, move on, live a life, but she is now accidentally sucked back into the world of it because there is a remake that is being made. They're turning it into a TV show. She accidentally gets involved in writing a story about it because now she's a journalist and she doesn't realize what she's getting herself into, and then she gets pulled back in the world and weird things start happening again. You should know going into this book that it is campy. If you don't like campy books, then it's not for you. But if you like camp, this is for you. It was a really fun time. It's a fast-paced slasher. It's silly, it's over the top. It has this cinematic ending to it, has some really interesting characters, and it's just like a perfect love letter to classic horror movies. Speaking of camp, we have The Venue by TJ Payne. This book has 2,603 ratings according to Goodreads. And this is for all of you who love those eat the rich type of stories. I feel like there have been so many popular movies coming out in the past couple of years that follow this eat the rich theme. I'm thinking of Triangle of Sadness, Ready or Not, of course, The Purge, Parasite, Knives Out, that weird one with Mia Goth that came out this year that I can't remember the name of. There are so many of these movies that are so iconic because this is just such a fun trope. And if you enjoy that, I think you're really going to enjoy this book. It's a fast-paced, campy kind of slasher that follows this woman who is going back to one of her old friends' weddings. Chaos ensues. It's a great time. Next up is The Getaway by Lamar Giles. This book has 2,822 ratings according to Goodreads. And this was a really solid young adult dystopian horror thriller type of book. That's not usually what I read a ton of. I've kind of phased out of reading young adult stories, but this one was fun. It's one of the few ones that I read this year, and I did think it was pretty solid and a good time. In this story, you're following a group of teens who lives at this place called Karloff Country, which is basically like if Disneyland was a place where you could live, and everything seems wonderful. It seems like it's the happiest place on earth, but then one of their friends disappears, and they start to uncover the dark secrets of what's really going on in Karloff Country. I'm not its target audience, not being a young adult myself, so I did have some critiques with the pacing feeling a little bit off, and I didn't feel as close to the main characters as I wanted to, but I still thought it was a pretty good time, and I would recommend it if you're looking for a young adult dystopian horror type of story. Next up is This Is Where We Talk Things Out by Caitlin Marceau. This horror novella has 3,503 ratings, and it is just a quick little read that is about this really toxic relationship between a woman and her mother. This story pulls you in really fast with a lot of tension and suspense and some great atmosphere. I will say it was a little bit predictable at times, like I could tell where it was going, but I still enjoyed the journey getting there. And this was my first read from this author, and I would definitely be reading from them again. Next up is The Deep Sky by Yumi Katase. This book has 3,728 ratings, and it is one of the more recent books that came out on the list. It came out in July of 2023, so it still has time to rack up ratings. And I did see that it made it into the top 20 for the Goodreads Choice Awards for the sci-fi category, so hopefully that gets more exposure so more people will pick this up. But this is this author's debut, and I had a really fun time with it. I'm not always one to pick up a sci-fi book, but it was marketed as a sci-fi thriller, kind of like a locked room sci-fi thriller, because it's about these people who are on this spaceship on this long journey, and then something bad bad happens, where it seems like the spaceship, the crew is maybe being attacked, and it seems like someone maybe on the ship might be responsible, and your main character has to try to solve the mystery. I think the writing in this was really impressive. I thought the writing was really, really good, especially for a debut. The characters felt so complex and developed. The setting was depicted so well. I was a little nervous about that with a sci-fi space book. Like, that's not my thing. I didn't know if I would get fully immersed in the setting of a spaceship, but I was there. I felt it. It was great. And there's also some flashback scenes in this that kind of show you the life before going on the spaceship. And there's so much to talk about in this book. There's so much. It was actually one of my book club picks this year, so I was able to deep dive on it and talk about all the themes about climate change and about identity and race and so many things in this book to uncover. So if you're like me and you like thrillers, you like walkthrough mysteries, and you kind of want to expand outside of your comfort zone a little bit and maybe try some sci-fi, I definitely recommend giving this one a try because it is very accessible and it was very good. Next up is another book I got to read as an e-arc on NetGalley this year, and that is Not So Perfect Strangers by L.S. Stratton, which has 4,250 ratings. This story is a strangers on a train retelling. If you don't know what that means, strangers on a train is just this classic kind of trope about these two people who meet and they both want someone dead, so they decide to commit the crimes for each other so that it can't be traced back to them, that their problems will be solved. I've read a couple books that do retellings of the strangers on a train story, and it's usually pretty fun. Sometimes they can be disappointing, but this one was really good. What I liked about the story is it had something to add to the conversation by adding an element of the story that leads to uncovering different conversations about how race can come into play in life, but also in a story like this. You're following two women, a black woman named Tasha and a white woman named Madison, and of course, strangers on a train style, they end up colliding in each other's paths. They both have marriages that they want to get out of. They have a little miscommunication about what that means, and you follow their paths and see how the consequences are different for these women based on the consequences for a black woman, the consequences for a white woman. It creates like foil characters against each other to give a new, fresh spin to this kind of narrative, and I thought it was done very well. And lastly is The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran, which has 4,306 ratings. This is just a kind of weird mythical journey where you're following this woman who is a rare book dealer, and she is on the hunt for the Book of the Most Precious Substance, which is a book about sex magic. And it's just a strange journey that you go on with this character in the story. There's some really surreal, kind of dreamlike qualities to it as well. So if you like a weird, trippy kind of horror story, oddly enough, it kind of reminds me of that A24 movie that came out this year. That was also like a character's odyssey journey after his mother died. Why can I not remember the name of any movies from this year? You know what I'm talking about. Here's the poster. This is the one I'm talking about. It kind of reminds me of that in a weird way. Just the way that character takes a weird journey. This character also takes a weird journey. And this was actually my first thing I ever read from Sarah Gran, and I will definitely be picking up more from this author because this was just strange, unique, and interesting. So that is it for my 10 underrated hidden gems of 2023. Let me know if you actually have picked up any of these books and what you think about them. If you can also endorse them in the comments down below so more people are convinced to pick them up, that'd be great. And let me know if I convinced you to pick up any of them that you haven't read yet. Also, let me know what are your hidden gems of the year. What are the books you read that you're looking back now and you're like, man, this does not have a lot of ratings, but it's really good and more people need to read it. Let's leave those all in the comments below so we can all find a lot of great books to amplify and hopefully find some new little hidden gems. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.